With Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth now finished, we are looking ahead to see what's next from the last and final installment of the Remake trilogy. There's a lot of things that I think we need, and there's a lot of things that I want to see. From characters to side content and main story stuff, we can all agree that the next and final installment in the series is going to be the biggest one yet. So in today's video, we're talking about some of my hopes and dreams for Remake Part 3. What can we expect? What stuff do we need as well to actually complete the story? There's a lot of ground to cover, but before we get to that, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're not already, and comment down below. Let me know your thoughts on the video today and your expectations for Remake Part 3. It's a big video, so let's get to it by talking about the characters of the next game. Now, there's a few characters that were teased in one way or another in Rebirth, and I'm genuinely excited on how they will all be implemented. So let's start with Vincent. Yes, one of the most important characters of this story that's, was completely missable in the original game and ended up getting his own spin-off later on. It's pretty funny. But his past is tied to the events of Sephiroth's creation, making him a key character in understanding the origins of the main villain, Sephiroth, of course. As a former Turk, Vincent worked for Shinra, but was assigned to oversee the Genova project in Nibelheim, where he fell in love with Lucretia Crescent, a scientist working alongside Professor Hojo. However, she chose Hojo over Vincent and eventually gave birth to Sephiroth as part of some twisted experiment. Vincent objected to the unethical nature of the project, leading Hojo to shoot him and use his body for further experiments. This turned Vincent into an immortal being with monstrous transformations, which fueled his guilt and desire for vengeance against Hojo. Though Vincent's role in the main story is technically optional in the original game, his background provides essential lore about Shinra's unethical experiments and, of course, Sephiroth's origins. His personal quest for redemption and revenge against Hojo ties directly into the larger themes of Final Fantasy VII. His story was expanded in Dirge of Cerberus later on, which explores his connection to Shinra, something that was obviously teased in Remake Integrated DLC as well, and now his role in stopping yet another catastrophe in the third installment of the Remake trilogy. I'm really excited to see how they work in his backstory. As far as mechanics go, they could revolve around his transformations, drawing inspiration from his original limit breaks while incorporating more fluid control. Rather than locking him into a single uncontrollable form on transformation, he could have access to different abilities depending on his current form, allowing you to choose when to shift between his monstrous states. His firearms could also provide a unique ranged playstyle, similar to Barrett, I guess, offering a mix of shots, rapid-fire attacks, or special bullets with different effects. I would almost kind of think it is like the modern equivalent of Dirge of Cerberus battle system or playstyle if it was kind of shoehorned into Remake Part 3. I think that kind of makes sense. Now, Cid's role in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was significantly reduced compared to the original game, but it's unlikely that it was solely due to political correctness, which a lot of you guys have commented on my videos saying that's why he is how he is. Instead, I think his diminished presence is more of a consequence of the game's structure and the way that the Remake trilogy is being paced. That being said, there are some clear changes in his characterization. In the original game, Cid was known for his harsh, verbally abusive treatment of Shiro, who we haven't seen yet in the new games, and this included shouting and insults. And in Rebirth, he's still a little bit gruff and impatient, but he's lacking the outright hostility that he had originally. This could be an effort to modernize his character and avoid maybe outdated portrayals of verbal abuse in relationships, but I don't think it fundamentally changes his core personality as a hot-headed but ultimately good-hearted pilot. However, if they do completely scrub this from him, it's going to be harder to appreciate the character because this is part of him, and his eventual reconciliation with Shira was a great point of redemption for Cid. So again, Cid's reduced role in Rebirth is more about the game's narrative structure than political correctness, at least right now. His major moments, like obtaining the High Wind and taking on the leadership role later in the game, are still ahead, making him likely to get the spotlight he's going to deserve in the third part. Now, for combat, his mechanics could revolve around agility and high-speed movement. It's fitting because he's kind of that Dragoon-inspired fighter. His spear would allow him to execute powerful mid-range melee combos, while his ability to leap high into the air could provide a mix of evasive maneuvers and devastating aerial strikes. He could also have a mechanic similar to Red 13's Vengeance mode, where Cid would enter like a high wind mode or something after charging up, enhancing his attack speed and allowing him to execute rapid thrusts or spear sweeps. And given his expertise as a pilot, he could also have abilities that involve some gadgets or throwing explosive or using tools to buff or debuff. His limit breaks could incorporate his iconic high wind attack, where he calls down a barrage of missiles or other powerful jump-based techniques that deal massive damage. So there's a lot to look forward to for Cid. Now, in some way, shape, or form, Zack is going to be playable in Part 3. As we know, he's playable right at the start of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but with a limited moveset. And much later in the game, I mean pretty much the final boss, he's much more fleshed out with what he can do. His moveset feels similar to Cloud in a way, but there are key differences that emphasize his raw strength and aggressive fighting style. His combat, I would say, is kind of a more modernized version of the Crisis Core action style combat. It's really cool and very satisfying to play. Now, speaking of wanting more Zack, Rebirth heavily implies that Zack Fair is at least alive in one timeline. Remake Part 3 has a huge opportunity to expand in a way that is important and hopefully meaningfully intersects with Cloud's journey. One way to expand on Zack's presence is by making him a fully playable character in his own storyline instead of smaller portions that were drip-fed throughout the story like Rebirth. Since Zack's survival alters the timeline, he could still be navigating a world where the events played out differently, dealing with Shinra in a different way, dealing with a different type of Sephiroth threat, or, like something was teased, a different version of Avalanche. Of course, we saw his interactions with characters who were either dead or changed in Cloud's timeline, like Biggs, for example, in Rebirth. It's going to give us some extra narrative content and narrative contrast to the main party's story. But that being said, the main party is more or less dead in the timeline that we saw Zack in. So is he now in the main reality in the Midgar slums? Zack could also become involved in the main plot through the merging of timelines, or maybe through Sephiroth's manipulations somehow. So whether he remains in a separate reality or eventually crosses over into Cloud's world, his survival ensures that he has a significant role to play in the final chapter of the remake trilogy. My vote is for large playable chunks for Zack, and hopefully he has a clear path to the end of the story, either by continuing to timeline jump or maybe just simply opening the door of the slums church and bam, there he is in the main timeline. I mean, that would be great. I would love that. Now, Aerith's fate in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 is one of the biggest mysteries left unresolved in Rebirth, and I did talk a lot about this last week in my kind of Rebirth retrospective video. While the original game had her tragic death at the hands of Sephiroth, the remake trilogy has introduced changes to fate and destiny, making it now unclear whether or not she will meet the same end of her story or if it will take a different turn. One possibility is that, Aerith is dead, but under different circumstances. Rebirth heavily implies that she understands her fate and is prepared for it, even dropping cryptic lines that suggest she knows more than she's letting on. And with the party defeating the Whispers, the Arbiters of Fate, in Remake, the events don't have to play out exactly the same as they did before. Sephiroth may have attempted to kill her, but the circumstances have changed, giving Cloud the chance to intervene. Rebirth ended on a cliffhanger here, so we don't fully know where it's going to pick up and what's true and not true. Another possibility is that Aerith still exists in another timeline or reality similar to Zack. We kind of did see this in the very, very, very late game date scene with Cloud. If Remake Part 3 continues exploring multiple timelines, it's possible that, we could find her again, or maybe she just now exists infinitely in the livestream, able to communicate with Cloud and the others in a more direct way than the original game. And there's also the chance that maybe she did survive, breaking free from her original fate. Obviously, this would have major implications for the story, as her death was a key moment in the original game, motivating Cloud and the team to push forward. So if she lives, it could alter the entire tone of the final battle against Sephiroth and reshape how the remake trilogy ends. I think this is the point of doing the third game and having it go completely off the rails from what we expect. Now, hang on, before we get any further, did you guys know that almost 90% of the people that watch my channel on the regular are not subscribed? So if you want to support this channel and watch weekly JRPG content, I would love to have you here every week. And if you do want to support more, you can join this channel by channel memberships. There's a link down below, or you can hit the join button below the video. Get some cool rewards like emotes and badges and Discord stuff. So don't forget to hit the join button and learn a little bit more about how you can support the channel. Now let's get talking about the world and how we're going to explore it. This is going to be fun. Now, there's a lot of the world left to explore in the third installment, and most of that would be courtesy of vehicle traversal, and honestly, I believe that Part 3 will be the biggest installment yet, just with pure content. But before we touch on flying or driving or boating or diving or anything else, think of the places that we have to visit or just return to. We've got the Icicle Inn and the Snow Village, the Northern Crater, the return to Junon, the live stream and diving into Cloud's memories with Tifa, Rocket Town, the return to Midgar, which I'm really, really excited for. And then, of course, the final stuff with the final boss battles and all that good stuff at the end of the game. And we also can't forget Wutai either. That should be expanded on in some way, considering its existence has had such a large presence in the story so far. This pretty much all of the world that can be revisited and have it all matter to the story in some way. Optional locations like the ancient forest and the Galnica airship should return as well by the submarine. And now speaking of the submarine, I'm really excited for that. This is going to be a great opportunity to explore the sea and the world below. It's a really great callback to the older Final Fantasy games. And how will flying work in Part 3? Well, will the world be fully explorable like it was in the original game, or is it just going to be a glorified fast travel option? My vote's probably going to be a bit of both. You can do whichever one you feel like. I would love to have some control over it like we did in the original game, of course on a much grander scale. And this was teased in Rebirth with one of the flying sequences before the plane pretty much was turned into a glorified boat. Next up, we have summons, side content, and super bosses. I mean, I'm really excited for some of the content in this game, and the side content, especially for those of you out there who like chocobo breeding in the original game. I'm assuming that this is going to be back and going to be a huge part of the next game. Rebirth was great and featured some fun chocobo stuff, but Part 3 is going to go real deep, hopefully with the breeding mechanics from the original game, where you can obtain different types of chocobos to access hidden locations. Gold Saucer Racing could maybe also become more advanced with some extra mechanics, customization options, and maybe special chocobo tournaments, or maybe even online stuff. I don't know. I'd be down for that. And as well as chocobo breeding, you know, if chocobo breeding is in there, Knights of the Round is going to make a grand return. One of the most amazing summons, or probably the most amazing summon in the original game. And as soon as we found out about the remake trilogy, I could not wait to see Knights of the Round. So I'm very, very excited. I don't care if that summon animation is like 15 minutes long. Give it to me. This is a great chance for the devs to also embrace the popular fan theory that the Knights of the Round were the ancient warriors or the Cetra warriors that defeated Genova in the first place. I love for that to have some more substance rather than, you know, it just being a cool summon. But if that's all it is, then I'm happy to see that. And Remake Part 3 will hopefully introduce iconic fights with the weapons, the Emerald weapon and the Ruby weapon. These battles were some of the most challenging in the original game, and their return would add significant endgame style content. I mean, they were teased a little bit on some posters and stuff in Rebirth, so the seeds have obviously been planted. Look out, because hopefully they're coming. So as you can tell, there's a lot of content left, considering Remake Part 3 is essentially going to be Disc 2 of the original game. I mean, Disc 3 was really just the final boss. There's a lot of ground the game will still need to cover to complete the story. Here's a few things that we have left. We've got the confrontation with the true Sephiroth, Shinra capturing some of the party members and the subsequent escape in Junon, Cloud finding out who he truly is, the weapon attacks, Shinra attempting to stop Sephiroth and opening the way for the party to the final confrontation, the Northern Crater, and then the final series of boss battles. And with all that, in what way can the story be tied up? The story's resolution must feel satisfying and impactful. It's got to respect the original while justifying the remake's changes. Stuff has to be rewritten. Destiny cannot play out as it did before in the original game. There's been so much setup that would kind of counter that thought. So here's some ideas for what the game could be called and why. Final Fantasy VII Redemption. This would tie into Cloud's journey, Sephiroth's downfall, and of course, fate being rewritten. Final Fantasy VII Resolve. This would suggest that the final battle and the characters do find their purpose and everything does kind of wrap up in a good way. Kind of self-explanatory. Final Fantasy VII Revelation. A final truth could be revealed about Sephiroth or Aerith or the planet, or maybe even Zack and his existence and his contribution to the story. And lastly, this is the one that I actually think might be the title, and it's Final Fantasy VII Requiem. It's a more dramatic title and a more fitting name for the final act of the trilogy. Now, what does Requiem actually mean? Well, it means a mass at which people honor and pray for a dead person. Now, this could lead into the fact that Aerith is truly dead. Having the name Requiem be the title of the game would pretty much all but confirm or allude to that fact. So yeah, Aerith's fate would be confirmed within the name of the game, plus the possibility that Zack doesn't make it out of his timeline journey. I think in the end, they both have to have a more expanded and significant role than they did in the original by helping the main party either via the live stream or something else, but they never make it to the main timeline again. Maybe fate could truly be sealed in that way. But I think at the same time, I hope I'm wrong because I want all of my fans' servicey dreams to come true. I want Zack to come back and be reunited with the main party. I want Aerith to come back. And there's so many hopes and dreams that I have for this game, but it's not all going to have a happy ending. At this point in the remake trilogy's life cycle, it has the most to live up to. There's a lot of stuff riding on this. We've pretty much seen 60% of the game so far, and the last chunk of the game is going to be the biggest, most fun yet. I cannot wait to jump into the world and explore everything and pretty much complete everything just like I did with Rebirth. So don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you again on another video. Bye-bye.